I think a couple of themes came out because the topic of discussion was that having heard President Macron's speech last night and the various speakers this morning, what were some of the thoughts that the ministers around the table had? So I think a few themes came out. First, I think there's a shift in the concept of what we term as conventional security. In the past, when people talk about security, they tend to look at it from a geographical lens, which meant that you're talking about perhaps the security of Southeast Asia, the security of Europe, and so forth. But I think there was quite a strong sense that this concept is perhaps necessary but inadequate going forward. And there are a few aspects of this concept that needs to evolve. First, I think if we listen to the speeches over last night and this morning, we will see that the linkage between the security of different regions are perhaps closer than what people previously thought. So today, you have countries in Europe speaking about how their security is intertwined with the security in the Asia-Pacific. And you have leaders in Asia-Pacific talking about how their security is also intertwined with that of Europe. So I think the implications of what happened in one part of the world having ramifications to other parts of the world has become very evident in the conversation. So that's one dimension of the shift. The second dimension of the shift is that perhaps in the past, people look at security strictly from a security domain. But today, I think there's a greater awareness of the other dimensions of security, including economic security, how economic security and traditional military security can be intertwined. And if a country is economically insecure, chances are that it is not so easy for it to feel militarily secure as well. Then we also talk about the security of the supply chains, because in the past, perhaps we were more concerned about what we deem as the kinetic phase of warfare. But today, I think people are also equally concerned about the security and the resilience of the supply chains, even short of war. So that's another shift that you can detect from the conversations of the ministers around the table. So I think this sets the background of what the ministers talk about. Now, having said that, the second set of issues has to do with our commitment to translate what we say here into tangible actions. If we believe that certain aspects of our security posture is inadequate, then we ask ourselves, how do we get our agencies, military forces, to build up those capacities, not just in isolation, but together. And in this, I thought there was a very useful comment made that in our efforts to build up the defense capabilities, it is a long-term endeavor. It must transcend the shorter political cycles. If we are really serious about building capabilities for the long haul, it must be a commitment across different political cycles. And over lunch, I think the members have also heard how the US Secretary of Defense, Pete, reinforced the US commitment to this part of the world and the US commitment to want to work with the various countries and military forces in this part of the world. And I think the ministers around the table were cheered by this commitment. But of course, I think everyone is looking forward to the next step, where we translate this commitment into tangible actions. I think it would be fair to say that most, if not everyone around the table would have hoped for the presence of the Chinese delegation, because the Shangri-La Dialogue has continued to grow over all these years. The participation has continued to grow, and that's because many people found it useful, a useful platform to exchange perspective. Now, we may not always agree with one another on all issues, but that's not the most important point. The most important point is that we have a platform, we have meetings, side meetings, that allow people to talk to one another, exchange perspectives, and that minimizes the chances of miscalculations or the misreading of each other's intention. And I think for all the security practitioners, they will know. Beyond a misreading or misestimation, a wrong estimation of one's capability is the misreading of one's intention. And it is only through dialogues that we can have this clarity of one another's intention. And that is very useful. I can't speak for China, but I'm sure the Chinese will have their own considerations as to when they would like which level of representation for which dialogue. So we continue to welcome China's participation in future dialogues. And even on the sidelines, I encourage all my fellow counterparts, all my fellow defense ministers, that notwithstanding China's absence, we should continue to reach out to China. And I'm sure China, in its own time, will also want to reach out to the rest of the world, because I think it's important for all sides to try to reach out to one another, to better understand one another, so that we minimize the chances of misunderstanding or misreading of each other's intent. So these were some of the main themes covered. Then there was a question about whether there's any new dimensions. Yeah, indeed, there were new dimensions of security talked about. For example, in the past, we talked about the kinetic phase of operations, but today, we have to also be aware of the threats and challenges on the information sphere, on the cyber domain, or even the intertwine of the economics and the security parts of it. So I think there are these new topics that are being talked about, of which a subset will be what was mentioned, including the security of critical infrastructure. The unique thing about some of these new critical infrastructure is this, if I may just use an example to illustrate. So for example, on the internet infrastructure, it's not just about Singapore defending what we have within Singapore, because for the system to work, it has to link with the rest of the world, right? So if we say that we want to have a secure critical infrastructure, it's not just about working in isolation. We have to work with partners beyond Singapore in order to secure this for the global good. This is part of what we call the global commons. It can be critical underwater cables. It could be other things that allows us to connect with one another. So the more connected the world becomes, the greater the need for us to work together to provide the security for these infrastructures that allows us to connect. So once again, that brings about another dimension whereby the defense and security cannot be cut up so neatly based on geography as per the past. But for Singapore, that also opens up new opportunities for us to work with countries that are perhaps further away compared to our regional neighbors. Of course, we will continue to work closely with our regional neighbors, but today, if we talk with our European counterparts, there will be shared interest in developing capabilities to secure our supply chains, shared capabilities in how we counter misinformation and disinformation. So these are things which allows us new avenues to work together. And I think that is something positive. So these are some of the things that we talk about. But maybe perhaps the last thing that I will just share about the dialogue over lunch is this one very simple word, trust. We can all come together to do things together only because we trust one another. Without that basic level of trust, it's very difficult for people to work with one another, to share information with one another, to help one another check our blind spots. And this is a theme that is recurring perhaps in all the side conversations. People are only prepared to share. People are only prepared to work together if they build that level of trust. Then the question is, how do we build that level of trust? And it has to operate at multiple levels. At the highest political level, people must meet, people must exchange notes, people must share frankly with one another. Yet at another level, soldiers, airmen, sailors, they must have the opportunity to grow up together, to train together, to understand each other's background, understand each other's concerns, understand each other's way of doing things. And the more opportunities that we create for one another to grow up together, the greater our chances of allowing the next generation to be able to work together to overcome the new challenges. And some of these new challenges may not even exist at this point in time. So this is broadly the backdrop of what we have mentioned. So with that, there's this set of questions about how will Singapore continue to play our role in this more complex world. I think there are a few things that we will continue to do. First, I think we will always be an open and inclusive platform for people to come together and exchange notes, to have frank conversations with one another. And I think from the feedback over lunch and in the various site meetings, I think many of all the delegations that I've spoken to, they all appreciate this opportunity to come together. It's a very short, intense 3 days, but within the short, intense 3 days, I think all my fellow ministers were all jokingly saying that how hard they have to work because how many meetings they must do in one day in order to meet so many counterparts. But that's one of the things that we can do. But the other thing that Singapore will continue to do is that when we interact with people, we must bring real value add. And that includes having our perspectives. So we are not just passing messages, if you like. We have our own perspectives garnered from our interactions with our friends and partners, and we share them frankly with different partners. Our armed forces will also need to have real value-add capabilities. I think people want to partner us because we bring value to the table. And that's what our professional in the armed forces must continue to do. So these are various things that we need to do and will continue to do in order for us to be that platform where people can come together and exchange notes. So that's what we will continue to do. So the way I would characterize this is, I won't use the word balancing act. Singapore is not trying to balance anybody, and we are not also the interlocutor. I also don't use this word, but Singapore is an open and inclusive platform that allows people to come and meet and have frank and honest conversation with one another, and where necessary, where it's appreciated, we will also share with our partners our perspectives, our interpretations. And likewise, we appreciate our partners sharing with us their perspectives and their interpretations of events. Yeah. Okay. Following from the conversation around the roundtable, I think it's also very evident that everyone around the table recognizes that the challenges have evolved. Some of the security challenges have intensified, and we all need to play our part to build up real capabilities in order to overcome those challenges together. So I think there is a certain sense of a collective commitment, if you like, for us to do this together. Because one of the comment made was that we all cannot just try to be safer alone, right? Because in the search for our own security, we should not end up in a situation whereby we create greater insecurities for others, and then we are on a downward spiral, on a prisoner's dilemma. So I think that is something that we are quite cognizant of. So I think that pretty much give you a sense and to answer all your 7 or 8 questions in a bundle of how, what has been discussed and some of the themes that have been talked about.
I think there was a question of impression of remarks. Do you want to say anything?
Sorry, impression of?
Secretary had some remarks. Do you want to?
I think over lunch, I think people were appreciative of Pete's or Secretary of Defense, the US Secretary of Defense, his candor, and I think that's the spirit of the ministerial roundtable, that people are able to speak frankly and share their perspective. And nobody is trying to judge anybody else, and that we give people a safe environment to share what they feel, what they think, how they see the world, and I think that's the spirit of the roundtable.